Bitterness is the number one killer of Christian leaders, and it leads to other forms of sin. We have to broaden the amount of resources that we are putting into developing those people. And then we have to have a meaningful idea of what it will mean to then deploy them. Deploy them to do what, right? Not just to attend church or participate in programs or any kind of be developed to then run programs. They need to learn to be ground level disciple makers. They need to learn how to multiply themselves through others. Making sure that the primary means of training and development and even just like feedback that a person's getting is coming through relationship, really helping them figure out, what does it look like for me to be like Jesus?
A warm welcome to the Lausanne Movement Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Watson, and today I'm joined by Josh Benadum, a pastor, disciple maker, and author of A Life That Leads. Josh is passionate about forming everyday leaders through life-on-life discipleship. Together we explore why the church needs to rethink leadership development and why the future of the church depends on forming everyday disciple makers. If you're listening, we'd love for you to join the conversation in the Lausanne Movement Podcast space on the Lausanne Action Hub, where you can share your thoughts, engage with our podcast community. And if this episode encourages you, we would ask for you to consider to leave a rating and review so that others can discover it too. Now, let's dive into today's conversation with Josh Benadum. Pastor Josh, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you with us.
It is so good to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me, Jason.
No, it's a pleasure. We're going to be talking today about leadership development, Christlike character formation, and I'm really expectant for this. I've been having so many conversations with leaders as I've been recording these interviews, and I'm especially expectant for this conversation because this is something that you have dedicated so much of your time to and your thoughts to. So why don't we set this up right and kick off by just hearing your story. I love hearing the stories of those who come onto the podcast and particularly around the topic that we're going to be speaking on, which is leadership development. And so could you share a bit of your story with us, a bit about your ministry background, and when you first began to notice the gap between the kind of leaders the church needs and what you were actually seeing in reality?
Yeah, absolutely. So I consider myself to be just a really blessed person. We all are in Christ, but I'm very grateful for the way that just the way that my story has weaved over the last 38 years. I was born here in the States. My parents were not believers, but they actually came to know Christ through a Jesus movement era church of house churches in the 1980s. And so I grew up from a pretty young age, just seeing my parents who were not pastors, they weren't church leaders, leading church in their home. They were, we always had people in our home. They were always teaching the Bible out of the home. But I myself didn't really come to any kind of living faith until later in my life when my family we moved to Cambodia when I was going into middle school to be missionaries. And so we moved to Cambodia when I was only a teenager, which was a disruptive time, to move across the ocean. but but that experience of moving to Cambodia just profoundly changed my life. I think left to my own devices, I would have been a more maybe superficial person by nature. But Cambodia, I mean, the people of Cambodia, the some of the difficult things that we encountered there with poverty and other challenges, just it really changed my perspective on life. And so I finally gave my life to Jesus, or I the walls broke down and I received him, understood him, received him when I was 17, doing tsunami relief work in India in 2004 when I was only 17 years old. And then after that, I ended up moving back to the States when I was 18 and got involved pretty early on when I was in college and really kind of a grassroots house church movement here in the States. And so my earliest experiences of Christian leadership were being 19, 20 years old and teaching the Bible to a room full of my peers, not well, just like transmitting what I knew in that context. I met my wife through that movement. And eventually, over time, I felt God calling me to pursue further training and to be a pastor. And so I went to Trinity Evangelical Divinity School in Chicago and got a seminary degree, and then actually came back and pastored and that movement that I've been a part of in college had, grown up and become connected to a larger evangelical church, and I pastored there, and really spent the following decade or so training people to be lay leaders, home group leaders, Christian leaders. And so I did that for about a decade, and then just in the last few years, my wife and I, we experienced God calling us to onto new things, and so we actually moved down south. We're now in Florida, and here in Florida, we've started a grassroots network of house churches, kind of getting back to our own roots. And that remains our primary ministry, is pastoring and developing people, and planting house church ministries. And then I also work for an organization called Brave Future, which is an organization, really it's a collective that brings together house church and micro church movements from all over the world together to be connected with each other, just for the purpose of mutual encouragement, sharing resources, and things like that. So that's I guess a whirlwind tour of my life up to my current ministry.
Tell me, Josh, this wasn't a question that we had prepared to talk about, but I'd be curious to hear why you believe the house church movement is something that has been worthy of your time and your energy. You spent most of your ministry in that space. What do you believe about the house church movement that you would like us to hear, for those of us who are in churches that are not within that kind of network?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that house churches, and again, and I'm not by any means a purist of the house church model. I think it's a model. There's a strong New Testament example of house church communities, but it's not something that, there are some people who think that, I mean, people can become, I think, rigid in any direction, but I really believe in house churches, namely because I think that they're an ideal, and when they're healthy, right? When they're missional, when they're networked, when they're accountable, because they can, obviously there's ways they can be unhealthy, like any kind of church.
Yeah,
But when they're healthy, they really are ideal environments for real community and disciple making.
yeah,
And in a way that oftentimes, sometimes and again, there's strengths and weaknesses, but sometimes in a large church context, where things have to be mediated by programs, it can be more difficult to have that life on life element at the core of things. And so I think they can be ideal environments for disciple making, for relational evangelism, for people meeting their neighbors and bringing them into their homes. Um, and then finally, and this is connected to our topic here in this podcast, is if we really believe in house churches, if we really practice that, and if we lean into that model, one thing that we need are lots of people, not just one pastor, not just a team of pastors, but we need lots of people who are willing to step up, be formed, be trained to then meaningfully lead in that environment, right? And so it becomes a context in which we can deploy people to use their gifts and serve the Lord.
yeah. I mean, I'm just reflecting with you as I think of the house church model compared to what we might normally see in a traditional church model, where you've got the hierarchy of pastors and elders and deacons, etc. You really have to be focused on developing leaders if you're going to be setting aside part of your flock to be trained up and discipled by someone. You want to know that they are solid leaders, not just in terms of their ability to lead, right? Their capabilities, but definitely their character. And I would just like to hear a little bit more what you have to say about that, because I could imagine that if you have a strong leader who might not be a Christ-like leader, you're going to have a group that's going to become very unhealthy very quickly. Have you seen anything like that in your experience? What is it that you guys are doing in terms of leadership development that kind of mitigates that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when people raise concerns about the house church model, they often raise the concern of, okay, but if you proliferate leaders, right, you have maybe less control over their training. What about false teaching? And those are legitimate concerns, right? And I think just because we empower people to do that kind of work, and that we believe that your average person maybe can lead in that capacity, that doesn't mean that we give up on giving people a solid foundation theologically, or accountability ongoingly, and most importantly, maybe most centrally, that we don't hold a high standard for Christ-like character and to be formed in the way of Jesus, right? That's essential, and if anything, it becomes more actionably essential because we have to care about it for far more people than maybe just the few that are influencing from the top. And so to answer your question, yeah, I mean, I think especially when I was a very young Christian leader, when I was in my early 20s, mid 20s, leading house churches and eventually leading in a larger church, we saw a lot of success and we also saw a lot of failure. I mean, that's part of what motivated me to write about this was looking back 10 years and realizing, man, some of the people that we saw come to faith and who began to teach the Bible, disciple others, facilitate communities out of their homes. Like some of those people are still walking with God and flourishing today. Like they've borne fruit a hundredfold. And many of those people have flamed out, right? Many of those people, some went out with a bang, right? Some, in some cases, the failure was profound. And so, what what did we miss anything, or is there anything that we could shift in our emphases to try to achieve just a stronger, just to see people more deeply formed and to be able to persist through all the different stages of life? And so that, yes, I've seen success in that. I've seen failure. I think, and I really think that this is one of the reasons why we really do need to bring leadership back down to its foundation, to not only think of leadership in terms of specialized roles, or to associate it too closely with specific skill sets, but to really see leadership as something that overflows from a life that is truly given over to, and given over to Jesus and receiving from the Holy Spirit, right? Um, People ought to lead out of the ways that God is leading them. And I think when that's truly there, when that dynamic is real, I think healthy leadership does result. But we've got to sow to that foundation.
Do you want to tell me more about that? I mean, how are you guys going about encouraging that kind of formation within your space? I'm thinking of Brave Future. I'm thinking of the networks that you guys are involved in. What are the process? Might be the wrong word, um, but really, what are you trying to encourage within those spaces so that leaders do place their being before their doing, realizing that their leadership is something that should flow out of them, like you were saying, rather than something that they should, like, almost like a facade that they put on.
Yeah, no, so I mean, in my personal network, Brave Future itself is a collective of many different organizations that are applying many different systems and many different approaches. But in my wife and I's, in our house church ministry, in our network, as well as the different groups around the world that we've been able to coach and encourage, I think one thing is we really believe in life on life discipleship. In many ways, kind of in the Robert Coleman, if you're familiar, spirit of things, the meeting with the one on one, the one on two, and not just walking people through like a 10-week program or like a half year study session or something like that, or a class, but really like an apprenticeship model of disciple making, right? Where people do life together, where you walk with people, not just for 6 months, and again, in some situations maybe you only have that much time, but where possible, where being in community with people, and then really trying to help people form in their character, again, not again using good resources, books, study methods, all those things, but making sure that the primary means of training and development and even just like feedback that a person's getting is coming through relationship, right? Through an older believer walking with a younger believer and encouraging them to serve, maybe helping them develop their gifts, but also really helping them figure out, what does it look like for me to be like Jesus? And so we try to practice that pretty densely in our house church communities. We encourage not just the people who are leading the house churches to disciple in that way, but then even to encourage the people that they are discipling to then find others, ideally people that they themselves have led to faith, but if not, or participate in helping come to faith, if just not finding another younger believer, and then to do that same thing with them.
Yeah,
Which maybe that sounds overly simplistic, but in many ways it's not. It's because we're talking about years of investment in another
yeah.
person's life.
Yeah. I mean, I'm coming into this conversation reflecting on so many other interviews I've had recently on the topic of formation, on the topic of Christ-like leadership. And the thing that comes back again and again and it's repeated in this interview, is that of the life on life discipleship, that those mentoring relationships, having those deep relationships with others that you are walking closely with, that are holding you accountable, that you're unpacking scriptures with. And for me, it seems to be one of those essential elements that can be applied in every context. I mean, what you just described now is not just true of house church movements and churches, but every single church out there for every single believer. What encouragement would you have to those listening who might not have that kind of relationship? What would you say to them, like as we were talking now?
I would say seek it out. I actually would say that I think that if we leave disciple making too vague, like on one hand, disciple making is a large scale mission, and I like to say in our ministry that it's a team sport, right? You know, we all contribute to the task of making disciples in many different ways. We don't all have to do it the same way or contribute at this on the same scale. But at the same time, if we leave disciple making too vague, then a lot of times we think that we disciple make by just having a random encouraging conversation at church or by showing up, right? When in reality, I do think that there's a deeper level of intentionality that's meant to be there for us, and we need to seek it. We need to not only seek our own formation, but we need to then seek others that we can really participate in helping them form, and grow and develop. And so I would encourage if anyone's listening to this is like, man, I don't have that. I would say, listen, there are billions of people who don't know Jesus. In your own city, in your own town, there's people who don't know God, and even if you're in your immediate circle, you know, people are all Christians, which is the case in some places. There's a good chance that there are those among them who no one has ever invested in them in that kind of intentional way. And so I would seek that opportunity. I would also encourage people to get equipped. I mean, I do think that learning on this is good, and I know someone who's been very influential in the Lausanne movement, or he's contributed in many ways over the past is Ajith Fernando, and he actually wrote the foreword for my book, and I'm blessed to call him a mentor and a friend. But he has a book called Discipling in a Multicultural World, which is just I think it's a vital resource, and it's a great book because it's written in English, it's accessible to many different people from different cultures, but it's written from a South Asian perspective. And so that I think that taking the time to read books like that, I still think The Master Plan of Evangelism by Robert Coleman is a classic. Um, but I think taking the time to read those kinds of books and get some inspiration and fill out your sense of what does this mean? Like, what could it look like to actually devote significant time in my life to this task, is something which most of us should do.
Great. I'm going to make sure that I put these resources in the show notes for those who may be running or driving at the moment. If you want to get those resources, we're going to put them in the show notes. Uh, Josh, I want to talk about Christ-like leadership. When you hear Lausanne's vision, which is to see Christ-like leaders in every church and sector, what stirs in you, and what do you believe that kind of leader actually looks like in everyday life? Because, like you say, if we keep this too vague, anything can kind of fit into those categories. So I'm curious to hear from you, when you think of a Christ-like leader, what actually comes to your mind when you think of that kind of leader?
When I think of a Christ-like leader, I don't just think of someone who is nice or moral. I think of someone who truly is developing the range of qualities that we see present in our Lord. And actually, I really love. I don't know if you're familiar, but John Stott, one of the last things that um, he wrote. It was one of his final addresses. He said, and I quote this in my book. He says, as I'm thinking about, what God wants for us and what He wants for the church, he was like, "This is what I've concluded. I've concluded that God the Father, more than anything else, He wants us to be like Jesus. He wants us to be like His Son." But then Stott goes on to say that's not just saying like His Son in His general moral qualities, although that is a big part of it, but it also means being like His Son in His fundamental character, like His humility, sharing His mission is a key part of being like Christ, right? There are plenty of people who go to church and are more or less moral in how they're living. They're kind, maybe they're responsibly generous, but even to adopt the mission of Jesus as our own, to stand with the disciples and say, "Hey, as Jesus was sent, so we are now sent as well." And to adopt that sort of missionary mindset, whether you're a quote unquote missionary or not, wherever you may be, and to accept, like, in the same way this was the purpose. Jesus came to not to be served, but to serve, to lay his life down. This is actually the common calling of us all as Christians, right? It's not just to achieve a certain level of balance or prosperity. It really is to go and die in the way that he died, and lay our lives down. And so I think that when I think of a Christ-like leader, I don't just think of someone who statically has these certain qualities, but I think of someone who's in motion in the same way as Jesus and moving towards the same kinds of people and the same things that he himself moved towards.
Oh man, I really like that description of someone who's in motion, someone who's moving in the same direction as Jesus and towards others like Jesus did. That's a really great description. And I don't think I've ever heard someone describe it like that before. The book you're referring to was Radical Discipleship by John Stott. I'm currently reading it right now, and I'll make sure I put in the show notes. Yeah, I read that chapter last week, I think. So I'm going to make sure I put in the show notes. I highly recommend it to anyone who has not read it. Excellent book. One of John Stott's final writings to the global church. So Josh, tell me about your experience at L4. I heard the reason why we're connecting is because you connected with Joe Hanley, who was running the leadership development track at the Fourth Lausanne Congress, and you guys connected there. I'm keen to hear about your experience in those conversations, what sparked in you, what you discovered as you're connecting with leaders from across the world, and particularly, what surprised you, perhaps in a good way, perhaps in a, well, okay, there's a gap and we see it and it's so tangible. So please tell us a little bit about that. I'd love to hear your experience.
Yeah, I mean, L4 was just such an amazing opportunity. I felt so blessed to be there. It had a profound impact on me, and just to be a delegate to participate in the Congress was really just and perhaps a once in a lifetime gift. And the real joy of it for me was connecting with other Christian leaders from all over the world and just hearing their stories, um, just experiencing our commonality in Christ in a very profound way. And so, for those who aren't familiar, when we were at L4, we had basically two different table groups. We had our plenary table group, then we had a gap in the Great Commission to which we were assigned. And so my table group was amazing. There was a woman. She was Swiss from a Nigerian background, running a college ministry. There was an Inuit woman from Greenland in my table group. There was a Japanese man who led a mission team in Cambodia, and we've all stayed friends. We all still like share resources and talk, and it's really incredible. There's a Vietnamese woman who ran a digital outreach ministry. It was really very cool. But then my gap group was it was all men from. There was a man from Finland, a guy from Hong Kong, another American. There was a seminary professor. There's also a church network leader from Nepal. And our gap group was developing leaders of character, which is kind of funny because I don't think I specifically requested that gap group, but that's the one that they put me in, which was very fortuitous. And really in both groups though, we ended up just talking a lot about developing leaders of character and what we were seeing in our own ministries, what were the cultural barriers we were experiencing. And you asked if there was anything that surprised me. And I think the two things that really surprised me were, one, I didn't realize that the leadership crisis is as global as it is. I think that I've been, even though I grew up overseas, I think I've been focused on ministry in the States long enough that I kind of thought it was we were kind of having more of like the bottom was kind of falling out for the American church. That's kind of how it felt to me. Um, but hearing even my good friend now from Nepal talk about how he's like, our pipelines for developing leaders are inadequate. He says we can't find enough younger folks who want to come into pastoral ministry, and even if we could find them, it takes way too long to get them through, to train them, to fund them. And to he's like, we can't produce leaders fast enough to replace the pastors that are either passing away, going on to glory, or the ones that are quitting for various reasons. We can't even replace them, let alone produce enough to grow the church. And I was struck by that. I mean, that just struck me as tragic, and something that as the church, there are some of those gaps in the Great Commission. I don't know what we can do like, I don't know at least what we can do to address them, right? You talk about some of the environmental concerns, things that are very complex. mass migration, economic issues. There's just so many. Those are complex problems, right? But leadership development um, feels like something that, as the church, as the global church, we that feels like a zone of faithfulness for us, right? Something that we can try different ways at that. We can do that differently. We can come up with new programs. We can activate more people. We can obviously we can pray down that the Lord would send workers into the harvest, you know. And so really being at L4 really motivated me and inspired me to take what I had already written about leadership development, especially developing lay leaders, and to try to broaden it to include and consider not just my form of ministry, but but really the global church.
Let's dive a little bit deeper here. I'm keen to hear from you where you see the biggest disconnect here. We have a vision for Christ-like leadership. You know, we see the need globally now. You mentioned how it's not just in America or in South Africa. This is a global problem, a leadership gap. We have a vision for it. We have a need for it. What is the problem between the vision and the need and actually fulfilling that need? What do we need to do in order to bridge that gap? You said it's not a complex problem. It's something that we can do. I'm keen to hear your insights on that.
To be clear, I do think it's complex. It's just there are clear inputs, I think, that we can aim for. Where with some of these other gaps, that's not as clear. I mean, I feel like there's so many of our leadership development systems or expectations around what leaders are in the church are just there. It's married to these very specific forms, right? And so in some ways, if your vision for producing leaders requires them to be able to preach in front of hundreds, thousands even, right? Um, to manage a large scale organization and and uh, and and you know run a variety of programs, whatever it might be. In some cases, lead worship. Like, you know, if that's your vision for a leader, is that they have to be able to do all these specialized, really almost like, CEO level things, right? It will be very difficult to produce those people in appropriate numbers in a way that facilitates growth. And so I do think that in terms of like where the gap is, I think we know what we need. We need Christ-like leaders. We need spiritually empowered, filled, truly Christ-like people who will lead with passion, vision, a sense of calling, all those things. But then our leadership models, right, our actual leadership roles are often these highly specialized roles requiring lots of training. There's often not that many of those roles. And I think that I do think that then creates a problem because, to be clear, I do think we need seminary trained people. Like I myself, went to seminary. I think we need to continue to produce scholars, people with knowledge of Hebrew and Greek, all those things. Like none of this is anti depth of knowledge or depth of training. But we do need to be able to train to and to deploy the like the everyday Christian, the ordinary leader. We have to broaden the amount of resources that we are putting into developing those people. And then we have to have a meaningful idea of what will it mean to then deploy them. Deploy them to do what, right? Not just to attend church or participate in programs or maybe kind of be developed to then run programs. But I mean, and I think they need to learn to be ground level disciple makers. They need to learn how to multiply themselves through others without ever having to be paid by a church. Or they need to be able to tent make wherever they may go. We need to be able to. I mean, I love the emphasis in Lausanne on like the workplace as mission. Um, that whole emphasis at Lausanne, I think, was really good. I love the idea of people going as missionaries, but not necessarily as fundraised missionaries, but living and participating in the economy of the places that they go where that's possible. And what would it look like to develop those types of people en masse who have a vision, who view the purpose of their life as advancing the Great Commission, bringing glory to God, and making disciples, who are willing to dedicate much of their time to it, to that task, to really to make it the goal of their life to do that. Um, but without the expectation that it will necessarily lead to a career or require a degree. If we could produce, again, not hundreds, not thousands, tens of thousands of those people in the church, I just the impact would be magnificent. And I think churches often speak of that, and will often will say that that's an ideal. But then what about the actual time, like the time of our well trained leaders? Where is that going? Right? Is it going to training those people? Is it going to teaching those people and deploying those people? Do the structures of the church facilitate that kind of thing, or are they afraid of it? I think there's some hard questions there that have to be asked in a lot of our actual church networks and structures, regardless of what model we're using, house churches, prevailing model, whatever it may be.
Yeah. Josh, as we talking, a clear passion for you is that everyday leadership, a vision for the church to see every single person as a steward of what God has called them to be a follower of Christ, and I do believe that part of the discipleship journey as we grow and become more like Jesus in our own unique makeup, that leadership does flow out of that. And so I'd be curious to hear from you. What does it look like when a church actually gets this right? You've obviously seen examples of this within your own networks and experience. And how have you seen this take shape in your context, especially through your house church movements?
Well, in my former church, when I was pastoring in the Midwest, one of the things, and I didn't start that community, right? I kind of came up within it and was a pastor there, and had my own sort of house church planting ministry within it. Um, but I was privileged there to be discipled and work under some older pastors, some men who had really been at that for decades before I had. And one of the things that I was always really impressed by, in particular by one of the men who really mentored and discipled me, the sheer amount of time that he set aside for discipling others himself. He did preach regularly. He ran the larger church, but he put so much time to the extent that he was willing to step away from other things. Um, he would he would forego kind of other potential activities or programs, or he would delegate those things to others so that he himself could be focused on developing just this really at any given time anywhere from 2 to 6 men that he would be pouring himself into. And again, he wasn't just running a small group for them, with only the end that they might be, and again, not that this is a low goal, but like that they might be better husbands. Although obviously he does want them to be leaders in the home. That's essential and first. But he had a vision for them that they would then go on and become disciple makers, that they would go on and become Christian leaders. In some regard, maybe they'd work for a church, maybe they wouldn't, but regardless, they would multiply, right? And because he made that an emphasis and focus in his own ministry, and then kind of called others to that, that really became the ethos of the church, where everyone viewed that sort of investment in others as just like the basic form of ministry. Like, what do you do if you want to serve God? It's like you put considerable time towards it. And so I do think there's a modeling aspect. You asked, like, how does this come about? And I think that I think leaders, if leaders really believe in this, then they will need to cut some of the things they are currently doing and then put considerable time towards doing the thing that they hope to see others do themselves.
Josh, I really want to chat to you about the traps that hinder growth and the barriers that hinder growth. And whenever I think of this topic of discipleship and mentorship and development on like that one-on-one perspective, from my experience, the biggest hindrance that most people have is just the lack of it for themselves. So they've never been discipled like that. They've never been mentored like that, and so they might very well have a vision for it. And yeah, this is an important thing, but because they are almost like spiritual orphans in that sense, they have no idea how to be a spiritual father or a spiritual mother in those spaces. Uh, what do you agree with that? You can bounce off that, and I would love to hear from you what other kind of hindrances or traps for this kind of mindset and modeling would look like.
Man, I really agree with you. I think the challenge of I've never been discipled myself is so real. I do think that we live in a really opportune time where, you don't have to necessarily move cities in order to access good resources, right? I do think there's good books. I think you can be discipled in a sense through the robust thinking of different, great Christian leaders and thinkers throughout the years. So I do think there's a personal onus you can take on that. You can seek out training online. There's actually a lot of good organizations now they're even offering sort of at a distance types of training and mentorship, which I think is good. I do still think it falls a little bit short. I think the deepest and most authentic discipleship happens with people walking in community together. And so my further challenge to people would be that if you've not received this, someone still has to build it, right? Even if you've not received it yourself, someone has to have the humility to then go make mistakes, learn the lessons, figure out how to do it well, get help where you can, because that cycle has to end with someone. Someone has to take the initiative, right? Maybe it's you. Maybe you're the person to do that. So that's the first thing I'll say. In the chapter in my book, when I talk about the traps that hinder growth, a lot of that chapter is about what takes out Christian leaders over time. Like what kind of I would say that a lack of being discipled yourself maybe is more of like a failure to launch. Like it's the kind of thing that like people never get off the ground because they've never been invested in that way, right? They've never had it modeled for them, and they don't do it for others, which again I think is tragic. I think, and if you realize that that's you, one, seek it out if you don't have it, see if you can find it. If you can't find it, start doing it anyway, and allow God to fill those gaps and teach you. Um, but but I think when thinking about the traps that hinder growth over the course of time, I wrote about a number of those in my book, and I think when I was writing on this subject, I was thinking back on the leaders that we developed when I was in my 20s. I'm in my late 30s now, but when I was in my 20s, I think about the people we discipled and the leaders that we worked with over the course of those 10 years. And yeah, some of the highs, some of the lows, the successes, the failures, and thinking about, what really made a difference, or what really seemed to like harm people over the course of time. And the things that I brought up in that are spiritual pride, which is sort of like a feeling that you've arrived, like having had some experience or maybe some growth in your life, kind of feeling like, okay, now I know, right now I've arrived, and losing that learner's posture over the course of time, which I think is a disease that afflicts many Christians, because we really, and in some ways, I would say that trap does relate to your lack of access to discipleship point, because I think a lot of us think, and especially if maybe, if you're no longer as young as you were, and maybe you've been walking with God for a while, it's easy to think like, why I know what I need to know to do what I need to do, right? I have what I have, and that's good enough. And I think that, but all of our lives ought to be in a humble learning posture, right? And so even at any stage, we should all be looking to grow, right? And if God, and to find ways to grow and to expand our impact for God's kingdom. And so one implication of that is that if you have the potential or the opportunity to learn or to be mentored further or to be challenged, then I think an authentic growth mindset is that you continue to seek that out. And so that's the first trap in the five traps that I talk about, uh, is a sort of spiritual pride, which then hinders ongoing growth. Closely related to spiritual pride is legalism. And so legalism, we're all familiar with what legalism is, but I think that legalism for the Christian worker often looks like a sort of rigidity that sets in. And beginning to slowly take your sense of self-confidence or your self-righteousness from who you are and what you've done, rather than continuing to look to Jesus for your sense of adequacy. And again, I think that if we've had a little bit of success, right? If we feel like we know, it's easy to become inflexible, and to really begin to focus, to look at the way we've done things and think like, well, this is the right way to do things, rather than seeking to be continually guided by God's Spirit. And so again, the consequence of legalism, especially when it comes to ministry, is calcification. It's rigidity. We're no longer able to missionally pivot to like the new thing that God is doing when we become legalistic. So that's the second one. The third one is mission drift. And this is something, Peter Greer's got a great book on this, kind of a classic book, where he talks about the way that Christian organizations lose their way over the course of time, just kind of slowly pulled by different external forces off of what they originally were meant to do. And which again is something I really admire Lausanne for. I think Lausanne is a great example of an organization that has kept its mission, which is just really impressive. But individual Christians, we can lose our mission too. We can also get off track. And there's lots of things that do that. I think we go through life stage changes and we start to think like, well, sure, maybe sharing my faith was like the mission of my 20s when I was involved in the college ministry or something like that. But now I'm in my late 30s and I've got multiple kids and it's unrealistic now for me. That is a form of mission drift. And it's not that like our ministry can't change, but the core things that we're about, the orienting principles of our lives really ought to remain the same. Um, because our calling doesn't change as Christians. Who we are and what we're supposed to pursue does not shift. And so I think that people who are once fruitful in serving God become unfruitful over the course of time because they lose the plow. And there's many other forces that lead to that. I think we could multiply this. I think materialism. It's the pleasures of the world that kind of choke out the seed. I think that's a real dynamic. Jesus talks about that in Luke chapter 8. So mission drift would be one. A poor response to suffering is another thing that motivates, that I think is a trap that many of us fall into. I once asked one of the guys who discipled and mentored me. I said, what have you seen destroy the most Christian leaders over the course of your 40 years of ministry? And without hesitating, without even having to think further about it, he said bitterness. And and he said bitterness is so he said because he says if you're going to lead for Christ, you're going to be rejected by people. He said you're going to engage certain forms of suffering that you wouldn't have engaged otherwise. And then of course there's this the normative suffering of the world. There's death, there's tragedy, there's all the things that we still experience. He says, and so either bitterness toward God or bitterness towards people who have rejected us or harmed us, whatever it might be. He says if that's undealt with, it can accumulate slowly. That's why it's dangerous, because like a cancer, it grows slowly in our lives until before you know it, it's choked out your motivation and joy. And so he was like, bitterness is the number one killer of Christian leaders, and it leads to other forms of sin. And I thought that was one of the most profound things I've ever heard anyone say. I felt guarded by those words, and so that's another one of the traps, the traps that I think we have to be aware of as we press on
Yeah.
in our attempts to serve God.
Yeah, I mean, on that last point, just reflecting back on John Stott's book, and his chapter on Christ-like nature, he speaks about suffering being one of those things God uses to shape us to become more like Jesus himself. So it's not something we should be surprised by. It's not something that we should avoid. It's something that have a godly vision for. God works out all things for for the good. And so if we are in a space of in a time of suffering, to be able to hold true to those scriptures, hold them tight and say, Lord, you're working this out. And give us the vision to see it. I would like to give you an opportunity to speak to the younger leaders. We are preparing for YLG4. We're going to have just over 1,500 young people who are going to be gathering together, and a couple more hundred online as well. For the younger leaders who want to give their lives for the mission of Christ, what are some patterns, or traps that they should particularly be aware of? We've spoken about a few already. Maybe you can pull out a few that you're saying, okay, pay attention to that. That can take them off course, because almost everyone who starts off in ministry wants it to be for the long haul. Um, how can we be more intentional about being aware of these traps, so that we can, as young people, be able to live more fully into that mission?
Definitely. So I guess just a few things, and actually, I don't even know if all of these things are in my book that I wrote or not. But I mean, first of all, I think YGL is such an amazing opportunity. I wish I could be there. I'm not young enough, uh, but it is even just as an environment for you to connect, for you to become connected with mentors, like what, like we talked about that whole dynamic of like not having been discipled. If you're someone who's engaging with YGL, this could be a pathway to you receiving real mentorship and discipleship, and it could be transformative for your life and ministry. And I actually think that one of the things that will help you go the long haul is seeking out good mentors, people who can help responsibly prepare you as you go forward. And so I encourage you to maybe even view that as one of the points, like get good friends out of YG shoulder to shoulder friends, compatriots, and then also try to find good mentors. I think both those things can make all the difference for you to walk as part of a team, and to be accountable, and to also be influenced by people who've gone further than you is just such a gift. And so I would really that's one thing that I would say by way of opportunity. I think I think another thing I would really encourage people, some of the YGL community to consider would be whatever you do going forward. Right now, many of you you're serving in different leadership positions. In some cases, you're kind of exceptional and you founded an organization. Maybe you're leading in a church in a high capacity. Maybe not. Maybe you're in the business world. But whatever you do, do not no matter how your roles change or increase, do not step away from ground level ministry. Do not get to a place where you are just running an organization. Do not get to a place where all we know where you're where you're consulting. Like, again, like consulting, it's fine to coach, it's fine to consult, but never stop engaging in the fundamental things. Like, we are Christians and we are to live like Jesus, serve the poor. You yourself, like, serve the poor, make disciples, disciple people, find other men, other women to pour yourself directly into and help them form, and then never ever stop aiming at and seeking at your own spiritual growth. You will never be a finished product. Continue, even right now. You don't know half the things you need to know. I don't know half the things that I need to know, and much more. But keep that edge and that excitement to just allow God to keep forming you and growing you into the image of Christ. Seek that maturity, and be seeking it all the way until the race is over, right? Be like Paul in Philippians 3, not that I've obtained it, but pressing on to reach the goal. And I really believe that if you do that, then he is faithful, and he's going to see you forward. But I guess if there's anything on my heart to say, it's those few things, and I hope you take them to heart.
Josh, thank you for taking the time to speak to the younger leaders who are preparing to go to Brazil and to engage with one another. I think those are great points. This conversation has been so rich, and so much of what we've spoken about throughout this conversation are ideas that you have in your book, A Life That Leads. And I'd love to give you, as we begin to wrap up, an opportunity just to speak about that, point us into the direction in which we can get hold of the copy, and to engage more with some of the insights. Um, and as you do that, I would like to know, and I'd like to give you an opportunity to share what the burden was that kind of drove you to writing a book. I think many of us have ideas of writing books, but sometimes it's that deep burden that we need to actually see it through. And so, please, if you could, just share a bit more about that.
For sure. Yeah, I guess to answer the first part of it in terms of where you can get it. So it's called A Life That Leads: Pursuing Christ and Impacting Others. It's on Amazon. It's on Ingram Spark. You just search my name, search the book, but also there's a website, alifethatleads.com, where you can access it as well. Um, and also, I'm also happy to interact. I mean, you can find me on Substack. Josh@bravefuture.org is my email address. And so, if anyone here wants to reach out and talk further about these things, or is looking for more resources, I'll do all I can, to encourage you and to give you what I have. Again, we're all in this together. As distant as we may sometimes seem, we are one in the Holy Spirit. So, but I think, as far as my burden for the book, what really motivated me, it's really Laussane's the same thing as what Lausanne is has articulated as their core burden. That idea of Christian leaders in every place, right? Every type of person, in every place, fully living for Jesus, right? And I don't think that has to just be an ambition. I think it can, I think it can become a more concrete reality, and maybe even like the central outcome that we aim to in all of our church communities. And again, I think it could look different. I think the systems and the language could be different. They probably should be different depending on the context. But I really wanted to write something. I felt that God called me to write something and articulate something that would be a contribution, like a that would point to that space and give people practical ideas on how to pursue it.
Very nice. I'm going to be sure to put that in the show notes. A Life That Leads by Josh Benadum. We'll put the link in the show notes for you. Also, make sure that I put Josh's email address for you to get hold of him if you're keen to find out more, connect with him online. Josh, this has been such a rich conversation. As you reflect on everything we've spoken about, we've gone in from so many different directions. What is one thing, as we close off the conversation, what is one thing you hope to leave with our listeners, or one thing that you want to challenge us with?
You know, J. Oswald Sanders, who I think has probably some of the most classic writing on Christian leadership and character. And I quote him a ton in my book. He has the very last chapter of his book. It's called A Spiritual Clinic. The last chapter is called Spiritual Mountaineering, and he talks about Caleb from the Old Testament, who towards the end of his life said, give me the mountains where the giants live. Like that's the challenge that I want. He says, I don't want to retire. I want to go fight with giants towards the end of my life. And so the very ending words of that chapter is Sanders just says, die climbing. And I remember reading that as a younger man, and just feeling like that is really that's how I want to die. Like I want to die in motion. You know, Jesus died in motion. And of course, you know, motion, you know, some of us, we might get sick, we might be physically motionless. There might be things that tie us down or keep us from being able to go the places we would like to go. But with the power of the Holy Spirit and the power of prayer, it's like we are spiritually, we can always keep moving. And God will bear fruit untold through the little that we are able to offer to him, that he has put in our hands in the first place. And so I guess I would just end with saying, just put your full confidence in him, keep your eyes on the goal, and do your best to die climbing.
I love that. Love the connection back to motion as well. Josh, could I invite you to wrap this interview up by praying for all of those who are listening in at the moment, that we would have all that we need to continue to be in motion, to continue to be walking in the steps of Christ, and to die climbing. Please close us off in prayer.
Absolutely. Dear Father, we are overwhelmed by your generosity, Lord, your just the abundance of your grace that you pour into us. And those things are not abstract, God. They can be tabulated in the form of financial resources, in the form of relationships, in the form of our health, God. Every possible blessing or good thing in our lives ultimately comes from you, God. And you ask us, God, to then give it back to you, to then offer it back, and you promise that you will provide, Lord, that you will bless us, God, you will give us everything that we need. I think of the disciples passing out the baskets of food and the fish. And then at the end of it all, after going to you again and again with empty baskets being filled back up, passing them out to the crowds, coming back, and at the very end of the day, looking at their baskets and seeing that there was still plenty of food for themselves, God. They each had a basket full. And may that be our experience, Lord, as we attempt to live a life that leads, God, that we would not hold back out of fear, that we have scarce resources, that we don't have enough. Help us to believe that we can pour ourselves out, God, because you will fill us back up. You promise to fill us back up. We will, as we truly trust in you, God, our cup will indeed overflow. And so may that overflow be the thing that meters our own generosity and our own willingness to give ourselves away. And yes, Lord, may you use these moments that we've had together to crystallize motivation, vision, but ultimately, God, it is your spirit that will take us forward. And so we commend ourselves to you.
Amen. Josh, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your insights, sharing a little bit more about your book. It's been such a blessed conversation, and I'm trusting that just as much as it's blessed me, it's blessed those who have been listening into the conversation.